They were just steps away from safety, a child playing hide and seek in the Smokies, a seasoned hiker vanishing in Yosemite without a sound, a curious boy gone in seconds near Crater Lake, an Irish traveler lost in broad daylight, and a churchgoer who simply never came back. 5 people, 5 parks, no bodies, no clues, no goodbyes. These are the disappearances that national parks don't want to talk about. It was supposed to be on a church retreat, a peaceful weekend filled with spiritual reflection, friendship, and connection, set in one of the most breathtaking places in the United States. But by the end of that June weekend in 2011, George Penca was gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard a cry for help. And in a national park filled with thousands of visitors, campers, hikers, and rangers, he simply vanished. George was 30 years old, from Rancho Cucamonga, California. A big man with a gentle demeanor, he stood over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 240 pounds. Friends described him as kind, thoughtful, and deeply religious. He wasn't someone who liked to be alone, nor was he the type to take unnecessary risks. So when he went missing in Yosemite National Park on the afternoon of June 17, 2011, it wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. George had joined a church group from Cornerstone Church in San Dimas. The retreat was well planned, with about 50 people in attendance. They camped, hiked, attended services, and spent time in quiet reflection surrounded by nature. That Friday, the group hiked the Upper Yosemite Falls Trail, a steep and demanding route offering sweeping views of the valley below. It's not an easy trail, especially during the summer heat. But George made it to the top. The last confirmed sighting of him was around 2:40 p.m. near Columbia Rock, roughly a mile up the trail. Some group members remembered him lagging behind, which he often did. He wasn't in a hurry and preferred to move at a relaxed pace. Others said he had stopped to rest, allowing the others to pass ahead. But beyond that moment, no one knows what happened. When the group returned to their campsite that evening, George was nowhere to be found. At first, no one panicked. Maybe he had taken a different path down. Maybe he was alone in prayer or visiting the lodge. But as night fell and he still hadn't returned, concern quickly turned to fear. A missing person report was filed, and rangers immediately began a search. By morning, a full-scale operation was underway. Search teams scoured the area, helicopters flew overhead, scent tracking dogs were deployed, flyers with George's photo were posted throughout the park. Rangers questioned hikers. Trailheads were monitored. Everyone hoped he was simply lost, possibly injured, and waiting to be rescued. But there was nothing. No sign of him. Not a piece of clothing. No torn gear. No personal items left behind. Nothing at all. Authorities were baffled. It had been daylight. The trail was busy with foot traffic. George was a large man. He wouldn't be easy to overlook. No one had heard anything unusual. No reports of shouting or strange behavior. And the area near Columbia Rock wasn't considered especially dangerous. If George had fallen, there likely would have been some indication. But there was none. In the days that followed, the search intensified. More than 100 people were involved. Crews used night vision cameras. Drones covered remote terrain. The weather remained mostly clear, offering good visibility. But day after day passed, and still, there were no answers. By the end of the week, the official search was reduced. It was as if the forest had swallowed George without a trace. Park officials speculated that he might have wandered off and fallen into an unseen crevice. Others suggested a sudden medical event. But those close to George didn't buy it. They said he was cautious, especially on rough trails. He wasn't the impulsive type. And if he had gotten hurt, why hadn't he called out? There were no sightings, no clues, no reasons. It seems impossible that a grown man could disappear in a busy national park with people all around and leave behind not a single clue. But it's not the first time something like this has occurred. Across the national park system, there have been other disappearances, trips that began with simple hikes and ended in complete mystery. George Penca's story became one of those cases. His family never stopped searching. They returned to Yosemite many times. Volunteers kept looking. Prayer groups continued. Every possible lead was pursued, but no new evidence ever surfaced. In 2012, a year after he vanished, a cross was placed near where he was last seen, a symbol of faith and mourning. A quiet testament to his memory and the love that never faded. Years have gone by. The case remains open, but inactive. Occasionally, rangers revisit it if new tips come in, but nothing substantial has emerged. For his loved ones, the most painful part isn't just losing him, it's the lack of closure. No last words, no explanation, no grave. Today, hikers still walk the Upper Yosemite Falls Trail. Most reach the top and return safely. But for some, the memory of George lingers. A man vanished here, in daylight, among friends, without a sound. It may have been a tragic accident, unseen and undocumented, or perhaps it was something stranger, something beyond what the reports can explain, something only the wilderness knows. What we do know is this: George Penca entered Yosemite National Park on a sunny afternoon in June, and somehow, despite everything, he disappeared without a trace. He was only 8 years old, a cheerful, curious little boy with a fascination for maps and numbers. Samuel Boehlke, known as Sammy to his family, was on a weekend trip with his father in Crater Lake National Park, Oregon. It was meant to be a simple father-son getaway, just 2 days of hiking, bonding, and exploring the peaceful beauty of one of America's most stunning natural wonders. But on October 14, 2006, Sammy ran ahead of his dad on a short trail, and within seconds he vanished, completely and inexplicably gone. Sammy wasn't your average 8-year-old. He had mild autism, which sometimes made it harder for him to communicate and caused him to respond to situations a bit differently. But he was bright, sweet, and full of life. He wasn't one to wander off for long and loved being near his dad. That weekend, they had stayed at a lodge inside the park and were enjoying the crisp autumn air. On Saturday afternoon, the two of them drove up to the Cleetwood Cove Overlook, a well-known pull-off spot near the rim of the lake. The area is fairly open, with sloping terrain and scattered trees. By most standards, it wasn't considered dangerous. As they walked together, Sammy got excited and began to move ahead. He ran up a gentle slope toward a small ridge. His father called after him to stop. Sammy paused for a moment, glanced back, and then continued over the hill. When his father reached the top just a few moments later, Sammy had disappeared. At first, it didn't seem possible. There were no cliffs nearby, no sudden drop-offs. The land sloped gently into trees and brush. His father called out repeatedly, but there was no answer, no sound, no sign of movement. Within an hour, rangers arrived on the scene. By nightfall, a full-scale search and rescue mission was underway. Over the next 8 days, more than 200 people combed through the area. Teams on foot, helicopters overhead, search dogs, thermal imaging technology, and volunteers with rugged terrain training. They covered more than 6 square miles, often searching the same ground multiple times. But there was no trace of Sammy, no item of clothing, no footprints, no scent trail, nothing. Search crews were stunned. The terrain was challenging in spots, but not impassable. Sammy hadn't been out of sight for more than a minute, and yet he had disappeared without a trace. Investigators explored multiple theories. Could Sammy have fallen into a lava tube or hidden crevice? Some are obscured by loose rocks or brush, but none were found in the vicinity. Could he have kept walking, getting farther away than anyone expected? That seemed unlikely. The area had been sealed off quickly, and Sammy wasn't known to roam far. Given his autism, some believed he may have hidden out of fear, possibly even from rescuers. But even that couldn't explain the total absence of clues. His family never gave up. Flyers were posted across Oregon. Media outlets shared his story. The National Park Service kept the case open. But no new leads ever came forward. To this day, nearly 20 years later, Sammy Boehlke's disappearance remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in national park history. The official theory is that he got lost and died of exposure, his body hidden somewhere in terrain that searchers failed to uncover. But to many who've studied the case, the timeline feels too short. The disappearance, too seamless. The aftermath, too quiet. Crater Lake remains a place of peace and beauty. But for those who know Sammy's story, a shadow hangs in the air, a lingering reminder of how quickly a life can slip away, and how sometimes nature chooses not to give up its secrets. He was small for his age, just 10 years old. His name was Robert Bobby Bizup, and in August of 1958, he was enjoying the kind of childhood summer many kids dream about, hiking, fishing, and camping under the vast Colorado sky. Bobby was at Camp St. Malo, a Catholic summer camp nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. It was meant to be a week of peace, learning, and fresh mountain air. But instead, it became the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the region for over half a century. Bobby had faced more than his share of challenges in life. He was partially deaf, which made communication difficult, but his spirit was gentle, and by all accounts, he was well liked by the other boys and trusted by the camp staff. On the evening of August 15, 1958, Bobby went fishing with a counselor and a few other boys at Cabin Creek, a short walk from the campgrounds. Around dusk, the group began heading back for dinner. Somewhere along the trail, Bobby was seen lagging behind. The counselor reportedly told him to hurry up, to catch up with the group. That was the last time anyone saw Bobby alive. At first, there was no panic. The mountains can be disorienting, especially for a child unfamiliar with the terrain. The staff and campers assumed he had simply wandered off the trail and would find his way back soon. But as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks and darkness crept into the forest, concern gave way to alarm. Searchers were quickly organized. Bobby had vanished, completely and inexplicably, into the Rocky Mountains. The search officially ended in late August. Devastated, Bobby's parents returned home without answers, left only with the weight of not knowing. For years, the case sat frozen in time, a painful memory, but one that many assumed would never yield new information. Authorities initially concluded that Bobby had become lost, wandered uphill, and eventually died of exposure. That explanation, while simple, never sat right with some. Even experienced searchers had difficulty navigating the area. Even more disturbing was a long-whispered rumor that someone from the camp may have known more than they ever admitted. Nothing concrete was ever proven, but the lack of clarity, the changes in testimony, and the unusual location of the remains all left room for unsettling speculation. Today, over 65 years later, the story of Bobby Bizup is still discussed quietly in corners of Estes Park, especially among those who grew up in the shadow of Mount Meeker. His name is etched into the history of the area, less as a solved case and more as a cautionary tale of how even the most peaceful places can hold secrets they never fully reveal. There are no villains here, not definitively, no conclusions drawn in ink. But for many who hear the story, there's an unshakable sense that something about it never added up. Perhaps Bobby did get lost, perhaps nature took its course, or perhaps something else happened in those woods that night. Something that no one wanted to talk about. In the end, we're left with a child's quiet face, a forest full of unanswered questions, and a trail that never quite led back home. He was an experienced traveler, a quiet man with inner strength and a deep love for the outdoors. Kieran Burke, 45 years old, was originally from Ireland but living in the United States. He had spent much of his life immersed in nature. So when he set off for a solo hike in Yosemite National Park on April 5th, 2000, no one could have imagined that it would be the last time he was ever seen. Kieran had planned a day hike, something completely within his skill set. He was physically in shape, careful in preparation, and known for being calm and sensible. That morning, he departed from his lodging in Curry Village, mentioning to others that he planned to head toward the Mirror Lake area. It's a well-traveled, relatively easy route, admired for its peaceful surroundings and scenic views. The sort of trail people take to relax, not to push themselves. The weather was favorable, clear skies, mild temperatures, and no known dangers. Kieran packed lightly, intending to return by the afternoon, but by evening, he still hadn't come back. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. At first, there was minor concern. Day hikers occasionally take longer routes or lose track of time. But as the sun went down and there was still no sign of Kieran, concern turned to fear. A search was launched the following morning. Yosemite's search and rescue teams moved quickly. They scoured the Mirror Lake trails and surrounding paths. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, tracking dogs, and helicopters joined in. But nothing was found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a dropped item or broken twig. It was as though he had simply vanished into the wilderness. The search lasted 10 days. Teams covered ridges, stream beds, forest trails, and rocky slopes. Helicopters hovered above, watching for a glint of sunlight off metal or cloth. But as time passed, hope faded. The search was eventually scaled back. There was simply nothing else to pursue. Speculation followed. Could he have slipped into the Merced River, swollen with spring runoff? Perhaps, but no body was ever found. Could he have lost his bearings and ventured deep off trail? Possible, but unlikely. Kieran was known for being well prepared and having a good sense of direction. Foul play was considered as well, but no evidence pointed to it. No signs of violence, no witnesses, and no motive. His loved ones were left shattered. In Ireland, his disappearance made national news. People struggled to understand how someone so capable could disappear so completely. His brother flew to California and stayed in contact with search teams, hoping for answers that never came. Now, years later, Kieran Burke's case remains unresolved, a quiet and painful mystery in Yosemite's long and storied history. No evidence, no belongings, no answers, just absence. The trails near Mirror Lake are still busy with visitors, families snapping pictures, hikers enjoying the calm beauty of the forest. But those who know Kieran's story feel a quiet unease in the silence between the trees. It's a reminder that even the most peaceful places can hold the darkest mysteries. One moment, a man walks beneath the towering pines. The next, he's gone. And no one, not the search teams, not the authorities, not even time, has been able to explain why. David Paul Morrison was 28 years old when he disappeared in Yosemite National Park during the late spring of 1998. He wasn't new to the area. In fact, he was quite familiar with it, having spent time hiking and exploring the park's vast wilderness before. That May, he set out on another solo trip, something he had done multiple times. Calm, introspective, and independent, David was the kind of person who found peace and solitude in the natural world. He checked into Camp 4, Yosemite's popular campground favored by climbers and hikers. His plan was straightforward: spend a few days exploring, and then return home to Southern California. The last confirmed sighting of David was around May 25, 1998. After that, he vanished. When David didn't return as scheduled, his family became concerned and notified park authorities. Rangers began searching immediately, retracing routes from Camp 4, surveying nearby trails, and speaking with fellow campers. Search crews combed through well-known trails and ventured into the backcountry. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the terrain, but there were no signs, no gear, no items of clothing, no evidence of trouble. David had vanished without a trace. One of the most baffling elements of the case was where it occurred. While Yosemite is immense, Camp 4 is relatively close to busier, well-trafficked parts of the park. It's surrounded by established trails, steep cliffs, and thick forest. If David had experienced a mishap nearby, it seemed likely that something, anything, would have been found. As days turned to weeks, speculation grew. Some suggested he may have tried a climb and fallen in an inaccessible location. Others thought he might have ventured farther than planned and succumbed to exposure. But no concrete evidence ever surfaced to support any theory. For David's loved ones, the most painful part was the silence. There was no farewell, no explanation, just an empty space where he should have been. More than 20 years later, the disappearance of David Paul Morrison remains a mystery. His name is now among the many unsolved cases tied to Yosemite, vanishings that leave no clues, only lingering questions. In a national park known for its breathtaking beauty and untamed wilderness, stories like David's remain quiet warnings. Nature doesn't always return what it takes. Dennis Lloyd Martin was just 6 years old when he vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on June 14, 1969. It was Father's Day weekend, a time meant for family and memory-making. Dennis was on a camping trip with his father, grandfather, and older brother. They'd hiked to Spence Field, a high, grassy meadow near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. The boys were playing a harmless game. Dennis hid behind a bush, planning to jump out and surprise the adults. But when the others reappeared, Dennis was gone. It happened in seconds. His father, Bill Martin, immediately began calling his name, then running through the field, searching frantically. Within minutes, a broader search began. Rangers were alerted. Other hikers joined. But there was no sign of Dennis. No sound, no movement, no trace. Over the next week, the Smokies saw one of the largest search efforts in national park history. More than 1,400 people were involved: rangers, Green Berets, volunteers, even bloodhounds. Helicopters scanned the terrain. Creeks and caves were searched. Yet despite all the manpower and resources, the forest remained silent. There was no clothing found, no trail, not even a footprint. Theories emerged quickly. Some believed Dennis had gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. Others thought he may have fallen into a crevice or been swept away by one of the park's fast-moving streams. But there was another possibility, one more chilling and harder to accept. On the afternoon Dennis vanished, a separate hiker reported hearing a scream in the distance. He also saw a man carrying something over his shoulder, moving quickly through the woods, far below Spence Field. The report was never confirmed, and no suspect was identified. But for some, it opened the door to the possibility of an abduction, an unthinkable tragedy, in the middle of one of the most visited parks in the country. Despite years of follow-ups, tips, and renewed efforts, no trace of Dennis was ever found. Today, more than 5 decades later, Dennis Martin's disappearance remains one of the most heartbreaking and perplexing cases in the national park system. A child vanished in broad daylight within earshot of his family and was never seen again. And the Smokies, lush, beautiful, and vast, never gave back what they took.